This is Todd Neal at the American Stroke Association meeting in New Orleans. Stroke, the third leading cause of disability and death in the U.S., affects about 780,000 Americans each year, most of them in the 7th or 8th decade of life. But occasionally, it also strikes children. At this news conference, Dr. Meredith Gollum and Dr. Warren Lowe presented findings from 2 studies that found that boys have more strokes than girls, much like in the adult population.
There's information from 2003 to 2007 on 1,194 children, and we did in fact find that there was a clear male predominance of boys in childhood stroke. Out of 1,194 children, 716 were boys, which was 60%, and this was statistically significant. When we broke it down by age group, we still saw a male predominance. For newborn stroke, 61% were newborns, and for later childhood stroke, it was 59% boys. When we broke it down by stroke subtype, there are several types of stroke. You can have stroke because of a blockage in an artery or a blockage in a vein. For arterial ischemic stroke, blockage of an artery causing a stroke, 59% were boys. For strokes caused by blockage of a vein, 65% were boys. When we looked at stroke caused by different etiologies, we still found that boys were predominant for many of the etiologies. For acute illness, it was 66% boys. For head and neck trauma, it was 70%. For dissection, which is a rip in the artery caused often by trauma, it's 74% boys. Some people suggested that trauma may be responsible for the male predominance. And it does seem like trauma may be contributory, but it's not the full explanation. When we removed trauma, there still was a male predominance, although the difference was not completely statistically significant. It approached statistical significance. We think that if we look more into why there's a gender difference in stroke occurrence between boys and girls, this may shed more light as to why stroke occurs in children.
We looked at a federal data set of hospital discharges that pertain to the year 2003. There's a particular pediatric data set that's called the KID 2003. And with this data set, it allowed us to search for administrative codes that covered both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke. Our findings very much echoed what Dr. Gollum has just mentioned, is that there appears to be a male predominance in both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke in children. And this observation echoes what previous investigators have observed, and it echoes a very consistent finding in the adult world that men tend to have stroke, men tend to be at a greater risk for stroke than women. But the difference in terms of the pediatric population is that the lifestyle choices that people make in terms of smoking, alcohol consumption, and obesity do not hold true with the pediatric population. So this suggests that there is some gender-specific mediator that has yet to be identified further. In addition, we found in our data that there appears to be 2 separate peaks in terms of both age and gender, so that males at the young age range and older adolescents seem to be at a higher risk for developing both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke than females. And this is an interesting observation that really has to be identified further in terms of what could be contributing to this.
A child that might be at high risk of stroke, children that have underlying complex congenital heart disease are at higher risk for stroke. Children that have sickle cell anemia are at higher risk for stroke. Children that have known blood clotting disorders. If there's a family history of people in the family having early heart attacks or strokes before the age of 50, or blood clots in the legs, or many, many miscarriages, and particularly if there's a known family history of things such as protein C deficiency or protein S deficiency, it'd be good to screen other members of the family for that. But frankly, a lot of times when a child has a stroke, it's a big surprise, and it's not something that could have been predicted. Like I said, there are small subgroups where there are children that are at high risk. Some other subgroups that are at high risk, when a child has meningitis, they can have a stroke during the meningitis. Children who've had cancer and have had radiation to the head can have vascular changes in the brain that can predispose to strokes. But these are certain subgroups where you know they're at higher risk, but for a lot of the patients we see, it's not something that could have been predicted. So a lot of times we have a hard time predicting who's going to have a stroke.
Because the incidence of childhood stroke is relatively low, I think we need to avoid making any broad statements that have large public health implications at this stage. I think that it's safe to say that we need to identify how risk factors interact with each other, because we clearly are looking at some indication of interaction, but how those work is not completely understood. The problem in the pediatric stroke field is an extension of what the problem in the adult stroke world is that A, people don't think of the diagnosis, and particularly in children, and B, there's a tendency for people to want to sit at home and wait and watch and see the symptoms clear up. So we've been in the circumstance where a child who's known to have sickle cell disease had neurological symptoms, and the family stayed at home for about 24 hours waiting to see if it cleared up or not. So both there has to be a recognition on the part of the healthcare community that strokes can occur in children, but in addition, for those children who are known to have risk factors, I think it's not quite clear why there is this natural human tendency to want to wait and see if things clear up, but that may not be the best approach.
I'm Todd Neal, MedPage Today.